Hello and welcome to Ask Me Anything, a series from Security Magazine where security leaders answer your questions about the industry, from best practices for risk management to the ins and outs of their position. I'm your host, Madeline Lawver, Assistant Editor at Security Magazine. Today I'm joined by Joel Dunning, Partner and Government Planning Group Leader at Wold Architects and Engineers. Joel has a wealth of experience in the security design field, working with a variety of facility and security leaders to ensure the safety of their organizations from the ground up. Welcome, Joel.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So, readers across our social media platforms submitted their questions for you today, so let's get started. The first question that we have for you is, how did you get involved in security design?
Well, I started at Wold Architects and Engineers a little over 25 years ago, and the firm is a national firm with 4 locations, and all of our clients are public sector focused, with the main building types being healthcare, uh, K-12 schools, and government buildings. As you can imagine, there's a lot of security needs in those building types. My first project was a 500-bed jail, which has the highest level of security type necessary. And it introduced me to the concepts of thorough security review and very clear security lines. And as I dabbled in K-12 schools in the early start of my career, it was about the time of Columbine shooting. And I realized that all of the lessons of security that apply to a jail can apply to other building types as well, and need to apply in many cases. Keeping the lines of security and where secure portions of the jail versus or building occur versus insecure, very important in any type of building. And unfortunately, as society over the last 20 years has evolved, and we've seen other active shooter incidents in schools and even in healthcare facilities today, the security lessons that we've learned on more secure facilities need to be implemented in all of our building types.
A question that we had connects to that, which is where should security leaders start when planning to design a secure facility?
I truly believe that the first step in facility design is a risk assessment. Understanding where you're vulnerable is important in the process. There's a lot of focus on the weather-related, accidental, and even more so these days, intentional acts to disrupt business operations. And we don't really, as architects and engineers, don't necessarily dabble in technological, but that's also a growing trend that our owners need to think about. But besides identifying those potential risks, it's really important to walk your owner through the concept of, what's the probability that one of those events is going to happen? With climate change, we've seen more and more severe storms and more likelihood of meteorological crises coming up. But the probability is one factor. What's the impact to the business operation? Is it going to be a severe or just a momentary blip and pause in their operations if this event occurs? What sort of resources do they have available? In many cases where we're working on a mission critical 911 center that has to be operational in the middle of a crisis that's happening in a region, communities have a backup 911 center. So if the tornado does hit the primary center, they can reroute calls and immediately get back to a backup facility and be operational within minutes. And it's a significant resource that minimizes the need to address the risk that happens at the initial primary facility. And then second, in our world, cost is important, that you can identify probability and impacts and not have many resources to respond. But if there really just aren't funds available or limited funds available to address risks, you have to have your owner aware of those issues and prioritize where their funds are available to mitigate the biggest risks.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think that issue of cost is something that's of concern to a lot of facilities. Where do you find that balance between the security budget and keeping the facility safe? We had another question about security technology, and it was what types of security technology do you recommend organizations use?
Yeah, it really depends on the why, going through that risk assessment and understanding what you're trying to mitigate. I will say that from a security standpoint and as an architect, um, my mind first goes to the building. I know that there are an awful lot of cases where there's existing infrastructure in place, and the only choice then is to apply security technology over it to that existing facility. But in my role as an architect and planning a new facility with security in mind, I like to think about the building design itself. And I like to think of it as concentric circles, where we're first dealing with site security. We are thinking about how close can public get to the building? How close can cars get to the building? What landscaping features can hold those different risks at bay and keep the building protected? Certainly in all types of facilities now, we look at limiting the building entries to a single point so that if it works for the business operations, can we funnel all of the public into one location? At some point, if they need to implement a screening process or some sort of lockdown facility, you're only worrying about one location and not having multiple entries that you have to secure. The next zone in is creating interior zones. Courts facilities are a great example that it's a standard to have one zone of circulation where people who are visiting, the public can walk. There's a separate zone for where staff can go, and then a third zone where someone who's in custody, being transported from the jail to courts, where they can circulate. And those three don't cross. So that way you keep people protected by designing infrastructure that instills security first. And then on a building facility side, then after all of those are considered, then you can look at, okay, where can then building security technology overlay on top of that to augment the inherent security in the building. So the video surveillance and card access are certainly very common, ever present in new buildings that we design and are being implemented in existing buildings. I mentioned weapon screening. More and more, we're seeing our clients be open to it. There used to be a concern about openness, projecting a warmth and welcoming attitude towards the public that government buildings serve. 3 years ago, there used to be a lively debate on whether you'd put some sort of glass barrier between the customer and the person giving the service. That's one change I've seen is that it's now expected that there's some sort of barrier between the public and the staff person due to COVID. And so it's very easy to kind of define that line now without necessarily conveying to people that staff are trying to be secure and separate from the public.
Yeah, something that you brought up when you were talking about limiting entryways made me also think of a pandemic response that a lot of organizations had, limiting their entrance to one so that they could do that kind of COVID screening. And it's interesting how that overlaps with safety and security now.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Another thing that you brought up about remaining open and having organizations be feeling warm and open to the public kind of connects to another question that we had, which is about overt versus covert security technologies and design. And I wondered, what are your thoughts on that? And they asked, when is one better suited to a location than the other?
Yeah, the overt security definitely has its presence in certain building types. Knowing that as you walk into a courts facility that you're going through weapon screening or at an airport, that you're entering into that secure zone gives people comfort that they're safe once they're inside that facility. If you're a domestic abuse victim and you're going to court and you're confronting your abuser, um, knowing that they don't have a weapon on them um, gives that victim comfort in knowing that they can safely go and appear and confront their abuser in court. Jails certainly um, having that presence of security, seeing the cameras, makes the detainees aware that people are watching, that their actions will have consequences, and there is a definite place for having that presence available. Covert security, I see coming more and more into place where you want people to feel like they're open and welcome. But as society has switched to this needing to respond to the unfortunate situation where an active shooter event can happen anywhere, um, having a covert security in place can give staff awareness of where threats might be without necessarily alarming people that it is a security situation. I think about open public meetings like city hall, city council meetings, or county board meetings, or school board meetings, even where there's been confrontations um, lately in the news, and having a weapon detection system. Some of those devices that are fairly new to the market, they can be hidden in planters or embedded in sheetrock walls in a corridor leading to the space that provides an awareness of if someone is carrying a weapon to security staff on site, but doesn't necessarily stop them from entering, or doesn't necessarily, if they have a concealed carry permit, or if their local laws allow that. It just gives that awareness to the security personnel on site of the presence of that risk, so that they're better prepared to answer. And so I think having that covert security is definitely there are great locations for that to occur.
Yeah, and you mentioned how overt can have its place, especially you bring up the example of a courthouse where feeling secure is an important thing for both people who are there as staff members or incarcerated people or witnesses, but also in sectors like a hospital or a school, I think we see the covert debate a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
We had an interesting project a couple of years ago that
Mhm.
combined both courts facility and a mental health crisis center, and we had to toe the line between overt and covert, where the courts definitely wanted that weapon screening at the entry to their area, but we needed to hide that from all building entrance because the people coming to the facility to receive mental health services might be very skeptical that there was a security presence. And so we had to make the building covert until you reached the actual courts area, and then it became overt. So kind of blending the two, and it highlighted how there's a different approach that's needed depending on the building type.
We talked a little bit about this already, but someone asked about your experience with crime prevention through environmental design. If you could go into explaining that a little bit, and then this person also asked, what design tools can my organization use to stop crime on our property?
Yeah, it's a simple design features. It's going back to the idea of designing the facility to reduce risks, but it's carrying that risk out from the occupants of the building to the surrounding area, the environment that it's in as well. So providing designs that put active spaces on the building fronts with lots of, or with enough glass that building occupants can see outside, so that it's the sidewalk area or the site area just in front of the building doesn't look like someone or some area where someone could get away with a crime. They feel like someone might be watching all the time. Creating facilities where there aren't little nooks and crannies that people can hide in, and surprise someone who's exiting the building, or walking down the sidewalk. We commonly will design landscaping around secure buildings so that the plantings are certainly less than 18 inches tall, so that there's no ability to hide in that area. And just thinking through all the design elements so that the area surrounding the building feels like it's less of a security risk to the people who are in that environment, really is the heart of CPTED.
That's really interesting. You don't usually think of a shrub as a security tool in that context.
Yeah. Well, if designed wrong, it can be a security risk that certainly a higher security facility. It's a place where a package can be left, and who knows what's in that package, and whether it's someone who's homeless who's just left their belongings behind, or whether it's an intentional act. Um, it's a risk to the people who don't know what's in that box or what's in that parcel.
A question that we had talks a little bit about working with organizations and talking about designing a secure facility and then its use after that, which is why is ownership and buy-in important when you're designing secure buildings? And how do you get buy-in from the people who then use those buildings after they've been designed?
Everything needs to be done with joint ownership from the client and the design team. It's not there's a stereotype of the master architect working at a drafts table and presenting this brilliant design, and people don't necessarily the owner, the client doesn't believe in that design. They feel it's been presented to them, but when you collaborate together to come to the solution, they understand the why behind all of the different components. And so walking an owner through the risk assessment and then implementing solutions that are based on mitigating that risk is one of the components of getting buy-in and ownership from the client. And I think that it needs to not only be the actual owner, but the occupants of the building. We will meet with occupants to talk about all the different details of the building, whether it's the floor finishes or the where card readers are placed within a building, what type of cabinets do they need to support their operations, and all the amenities within the building. But having the conversation with them about where security occurs and how their operations are affected really is important, because if they come in and just say, man, this locked door is right in the way of where I need to be going all the time, if they don't understand that that locked door is critical to separating a risk from the rest of the staff, and they end up just putting in a doorstop or putting a brick down on the floor and propping that door open, they're violating the security goals of the project and don't understand why. So understanding the why behind and getting their buy-in and their ownership to the security strategies is really important to the long-term success of the strategy.
We had another question from a reader, which was for organizations that aren't planning a move or a new construction, what strategies can you recommend to up perimeter and internal facility security?
Now, it goes back to the previous question a little bit about policy enforcement, going through and doing an audit to see where the intended security isn't being met because policies aren't being enforced. There are simple applications like there are card readers in place, but the permissions on those card readers aren't reinforcing the security policies that the building was originally designed for. And just cleaning up those authorized entrants through that door and reinforcing that policy and educating people on the reason behind it can mitigate a bunch of risks. Certainly, trying to reevaluate an existing facility, looking how close you are to creating those different internal security zones. Certainly looking at emergency egress. Building code, fire code has helped our industry quite a bit be ahead of the game, but adding active shooter and other security risks to the mix has forced a slightly different perspective that thinking through not just how do we exit a building during a fire or other emergency, but what's a second way out in case the first one is blocked by an active shooter. Thinking through those sequences and those processes is another thing that can be applied to an existing building. And again, just changing some locks, changing some security policies to allow that second exit can really help out. Certainly, there's the layering of security technology, the card access, video surveillance, other things like that you can start off with a fairly small system, fairly inexpensive, utilize it where it's most critical and provides the most benefit without doing a massive remodeling or massive a new construction building.
The thing that you brought up about fire codes and building codes advancing the industry, but then the incidence of active shooters kind of complicating that brings up, I think, what's been a prominent debate in the security industry about barricades and different active shooter methods interacting with those building codes. I wondered if you had any advice for navigating a layered security strategy that's dealing with a lot of different threats.
Dig in early is my advice. We find that an open conversation with the local building official and the local fire marshal and police chief is an important way to start off with start the conversation, because in many cases the exiting needed for a building emergency is opposed to the lockdown situation, and people in a crisis, are they're scrambling to figure out what the right thing to do is. Building code has addressed fire risks quite a bit, and figuring out how people can get out of a building that's on fire. But it's a whole nother piece that people are learning how to deal with, how to escape when there's an active shooter and other security risks that might be present in a building. And even the law enforcement response might be different. And we found that, in some communities, the law enforcement officers want the building as open as possible so that they can navigate through and neutralize the threat without having to worry about doors that are on lockdown. Other places, the law enforcement want the building to have a lockdown capability that they can override. And so really starting that discussion early, I think, is the easiest way to find the right solution. But there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Every community, every personality that gets involved is going to have a little bit different approach. Every facility has security needs. We're gone from the days where you can just build a new building or help an owner remodel a building and ignore it. It's a lot like sustainability and fire code, where it's just a component where it needs to be addressed. Even if it's not a high risk situation in the risk assessment that you've done, it still needs to be thought about. It still needs to be prepared for the what if scenario. 20 years down the line, things might change. And it's good to have thought about security as you're designing a facility early in the process so that it's flexible and can adapt and respond as those security needs change in the future.
I think that makes a lot of sense, especially as security needs are going to change. Thinking about that first probably sets you up for a lot more success.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for listening to Ask Me Anything from Security Magazine. Remember to follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter to submit your questions for a future AMA episode. Listen to or watch more of the Ask Me Anything series on our LinkedIn Live, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or directly from our site, securitymagazine.com. See you next time.